Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Wanted to thank you for taking time out of your busy day. Hopefully what we'll present will be interesting and informative. Payment security, QR security has been a hot topic these days. So what I wanted to do with this presentation is spend about 20 minutes or thereabouts walking through some of the things that we need to learn about payment security and then open it up for questions. I'd like this to be an interactive session as I find that that's where we get kind of the most value. Most importantly, I think as business owners, as payment providers, and as parking operators, as well as consumers, hopefully everyone comes away from this presentation with a little extra something. We only have 45 minutes, and payment security ends up being an exciting topic, and there's a lot of funny stories around this. So if we run out of time, be more than open to having discussions offline afterwards. A little bit about myself. My name is Michael Back. I'm the founder and CEO of Honk, but I've been in payments for more than 20 years. I'm a payments entrepreneur at heart. Founded Honk in 2013. But I've been in the payment industry since 2001, more than 20 years. I've worked with some of the world's largest payment processors. I've worked with US Bank, which is Elevon. I've worked with Global Payments. Honk itself has processed more than $500 million worth of payments securely. And over my career, I've processed literally billions of dollars worth of payments. So I still like to think I'm learning a thing or two about parking. But when it comes to payments and payment security, I like to think I know it reasonably well. As far as our agenda for today, I wanted to take you through kind of the history of payment acceptance, because we're going to talk about security and best practices. And the key thing that we're going to learn very, very quickly is whenever there's an exchange of value, there are bad actors that are trying to take advantage. So we're going to walk through the history, like literally from the beginning of time, talk to you about kind of security from a technical perspective, and then I think the meat of the presentation where we'll talk about best practices. And these are things, again, that we can look for as consumers. These are things that we can look for as business owners, and these are things that we can look for as payments providers. So now let's talk about the history of payment acceptance. Payments started, literally stores of value thousands of years ago. The word check, which is probably an antiquated, we hardly use checks anymore. The word check comes from the fact that currency was counterfeited. So the Bank of England created serialized notes so people could check and see that this was a proper serialized transfer of value, because the bad actors way back when were counterfeiting notes or bills or barter or whatever it is they were doing. And so that was the first idea of adding payment security. And as we kind of move along, Western Union in terms of money transfer, the first credit card was introduced, and it was very much a manual signature, an IOU, if you will. Then technology allowed for, faster transfers between buyer and seller. Right up to where we are today, and we'll talk about kind of this world of e-commerce in which literally cash is dwindling by the minute and electronic payments rule the day. So first thing we're going to talk about when we're in the world of electronic payments is this concept of what are the basic pillars. The key thing here is what are the things that are happening in real time. So you've heard terms like PCI. PCI, if I can boil it down to something, it's really it's a series of best practices to secure electronic payments. So it's, how we store card data, it's how we transmit card data, but it goes well beyond that. The things that we can do in real time, looking for abnormal patterns, abnormal spending, things like SSL, things like, the fact that we're up and running 24/7, real-time authorization, bringing it into the parking world. It really wasn't too long ago when pay stations and parking meters were cash only. And then as soon as they started accepting credit cards, it was store and forward. So it was farming credit card data. saving it, uploading it once a day. Well, that developed a cottage industry of people taking fake credit cards, buying slips and selling it to other people because it didn't even matter. The cards weren't being checked. Now we're authorizing cards in real time. And the fact of the matter is that every time technology advances, as I said at the beginning, bad actors find ways to circumvent it. So what is it that we look out for? And again, I want to spend kind of the volume of our time here because the fact is that, as I said, as a consumer, as a business owner, we want to look out for what are kind of safe things that we can do, right? We're all using our credit cards. Most recently, I was in a sports venue. It had gone totally cashless. That was a business decision they made. Certainly, there's some people in that stadium that, perhaps didn't have credit cards, but, that business made a decision that for, the good of their business, for security, for speed, for, the ROI, they're not going to deal with cash because obviously cash comes with its own issues. So first thing I'm going to do, and it's the QR obviously that is getting a lot of press. Hopefully everyone saw the Super Bowl this weekend. Obviously one of the biggest commercials that is talked about was just a QR code bouncing along the screen for Coinbase, for a digital currency. But these are all examples of digital electronic payments and fraud. So you're seeing here phishing. We all get telemarketers calling us and, telling us our social security numbers are been compromised and the police are after us. A call from Amazon, a call from Netflix, click here. These are some of the oldest frauds. In the early days, it was the prince in Nigeria who had a bunch of money he wanted to give you. So as consumers, we have to be smart. And we have to understand that if it doesn't look good, doesn't feel good, doesn't, something feels off, it probably is. Like my mother said, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Well, that comes in the world of payments. So, first thing is SSL, right? Every website in the world that we interact with is secured with 128-bit encryption, if not more. And a lot of browsers today will even block you and tell you there's a security risk. So the first thing is if the website's not secure, we shouldn't deal with it. So whether that's online, offline, at a pay station, with a phone, on a computer, if we're not interacting with something that gets the check mark, then we shouldn't be interacting with it whatsoever. Mobile wallets. I'm going to stop here for a sec. Again, as a consumer, and then we'll bring it back to the supply side of the equation in terms of business operator, business owner. But the reason mobile wallets exist is because they're trusted. So Google, Apple, PayPal are a couple examples of mobile wallets. Samsung has one, and there's others, but these are the kind of the three biggest in North America today. And no fraudster is going to accept this mobile wallet. And it really comes down to the way they store the data. There isn't enough data passed that anyone can steal enough data to do anything criminal. So first thing I would say as a buyer, as a consumer, as well as a seller, is insist on mobile wallets. Now, not everyone has adopted. I can tell you that in the pandemic, Google Pay, Apple Pay have absolutely exploded. So it is almost 2x what it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And so more and more people have them. Not 100% of people have them, but fact is a fraudster will have zero have them. They won't ever. They want your credit card data. They'll be asking for things like credit card number, CVV, which is the 3 digits on the back of the card, AVS, which is a zip code. They'll be asking for more and more information. They may even be asking for date of birth and things like social security numbers. Why would you ever give that information to purchase a good and service? I mean, the answer is you wouldn't. And as a consumer, be cognizant of that and never give that information because no one would ask that. But I will tell you that reputable sites will offer Apple and Google and PayPal and other digital wallets. And as a consumer, you should use them. App clips. So this is a fairly new thing in the world of Apple, and it's built into the iOS. Again, fraudsters won't have an app clip built because it has to go through Apple's vetting process. And Apple does not let anyone into their app store, or just everyone into their app store. Everything has to go through a series of checks and balances and some of all those things that, that Apple does to make sure that they deliver the Apple-like experience. So again, as a consumer, if you see it looking pretty, built right into the iOS versus triggering a browser, then you're dealing with someone that's reputable. And on the supply side of the equation, you should ask for a supplier that can deliver you these things. Branding. The thing about fraudsters is that they steal someone's brand, but they don't do it great, right? We know that in the world of luxury goods, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, you name it, you can tell if you look closely a real one from a fake one. Maybe the name is spelled wrong, maybe the colors are off, maybe there's no branding whatsoever, maybe the seams are crooked, something that that a legitimate provider would never give. Consumers, again, and as operators, we should be looking for branding. It's not that someone won't try to do it, but they won't be able to replicate it to the degree and to the sophistication that someone who's legit. So look for branding, whether that's Visa, MasterCard logos, whether that's bank branding. I showed an example of Netflix, whether it's URL in the scenario of a non-app clip. Android is a non-app clip experience. The URL won't be branded. It may or may not be secure. So these are all the things that we should be looking for when we do this. And I kind of ran through this quickly, but here's the key thing to note. We're all in this together. There's three pillars to payment acceptance. There's the payment processing, issuing side, the people putting cards into people's hands, and there is the card acceptance side, spending, and then there's the consumer. And everybody has a role. And the key thing that I want to point out there is that it involves a little bit of work on behalf of everybody. The consumer needs to be vigilant, the payment processor needs to be vigilant, and the merchant operator needs to be vigilant. Some of the most common frauds that I've seen in my years in payment are at places like gas stations and restaurants, where cards are getting skimmed and the attendant is swiping the card twice, making a copy for himself and charging the bill. I've seen that. I've seen cash fraud, whether that's shrinkage and theft on the part of employees or counterfeiting on behalf of bad actors. I have seen skimmers. Skimmers are devices that are added to unattended payment solutions that allow the card to be read. And the interesting thing about all credit card fraud is, we're seeing a lot of it today. Some things are new, but it's always been there. It's just, what do we look out for? So, the idea of credit card fraud, electronic payments fraud, as people in the parking industry, we're selling parking spaces, absolutely, but we're providing an unattended payment platform. So we've gotten rid of, for the most part, we've gotten rid of labor, we've got rid of attendants, we're sending labor around several times a day to inspect our facilities, but we've made a business decision, and that business decision is, it is better, faster, smarter, cheaper to do this without attendants and with technology than it is to do it with attendants and lack of technology. And that's our future. The future of this world is moving towards more unattended, more self-service, and more touchless. So while there's been some press lately around credit card security specifically, and QR security, I mean, it really affects anything in an unattended scenario. And I'll end on this point, and I see there's a number of questions, and I'll get to address them. And if you're coming up with questions, then please do it now. As I said, we want to keep this for 45 minutes and want to make this as interactive as possible. The world's moving to unattended. even Walmart, the world's largest retailer. I was in one, not too long ago, and I was absolutely blown away that they had gotten rid of at least 2/3 of their checkout lanes and did it with self-service unattended payment terminals with 1 or 2 staff overseeing kind of 20 or 30 self-service. And they made a business decision there. They realized, there's some theft going on, but figured out that the cost of that loss is more than made up for the additional cost savings and revenue gains they get from eliminating the labor. So that's the world we live in. Amazon is testing their grab-and-go stores. So they're talking to the exact same things, self-service, unattended, touchless. They're using biometrics to get there. The world is moving to unattended. Parking, believe it or not, was one of the first industries to move wholly unattended. And the key thing what's happening in the world of parking now is the unattended payments are moving from hardware to software. So yes, there's problems, but we've all dealt with chargebacks, even with our hardware. That's an example of a fraud. And with QR, with apps, there's absolutely nothing that's immune. And the point is that we're all in this together. It requires a good payment provider who is doing certain things to make sure that risks are minimal. It requires a good operator who's doing certain things or she's doing certain things to make sure that anything is caught and is caught quickly. And it requires a consumer being prudent. And all of those 3 things are involved. And the last point I'll make, and then I'll open up the floor, is that the good thing about the world that we work in, specifically in parking, is, one, and this applies to all industries, cardholders are immune. So any issue that happens to a cardholder, for the most part, assuming they're not complacent in it, there's no cardholder risk. They simply call their card company and they say, I never authorized this charge. They cancel their card, charges are reversed. And on our side of the equation, on the merchant side and on the processor side, we have to deal with that problem. So the cardholders, even if they do have an issue, they generally have 0 liability. On our side of things, we have to manage that liability. And hopefully I've given some tips and tricks. And I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to look down here and see if there are any questions. Okay, so first question I've got. Does Android have an app clip experience? Kinda is the answer. Google's making some inroads with Google Pay, and they're changing the way Google Pay operates. And it's not quite an app clip experience. But it's getting closer to one. Google generally trails Apple. But I will tell you that back to my earlier point about digital wallets. If you're choosing an electronic payments provider, choose one that supports Apple and Google. Because twofold. One, unscrupulous payment provider won't be able to support it. They want the raw cardholder data. They don't want the encrypted data. And 2, Apple and Google won't approve them. So it's really, really easy, by the way, to just put up a field and ask people to put in credit cards or debit cards. And it's much harder to do the work it takes to tokenize and secure and go through the hoops. The next question I have here is about, sorry, let me read that again. Yeah. So the next question I have here is about, it's an interesting question. It's about kind of foreign. Can you block foreign cards is really the thing. Here's what I'll tell you. You can do whatever you want. You may not want to block foreign cards because if you live or you operate in an area that has visitors and tourists and whatnot, it may not be a good practice. But I will say that with digital payments, You have the ability to block license plates. You have the ability to block cards. You have the ability to secure your payment process more than you do with physical hardware. Physical hardware is all sitting there looking to read cards, and it doesn't matter where that card comes from. A skimmer will read a foreign card as just as easy as will a domestic card. So, my advice on there is not to limit card acceptance, but to manage card acceptance. And I can tell you from a honk perspective, we look at all sorts of things. In the background, we are running security, and we look at things like velocity. Velocity is this parking lot, it's 11, so it's 3 o'clock in the morning. It shouldn't have, any real transaction volume, but it's getting hit. We'll flag it, we'll stop it. We'll do that before any operator even wakes up in the morning and sees it. If the average transaction size is $10 and we see a $1 transaction, again, we'll flag it. We expect things, and again, it's AI, it's mathematical, it's some of the things that we do in the background to protect our customers. We're doing a bunch of checks so that some of these issues are caught ever before they're even their issues. That being said, there are a number of, foreign cards as an example of one where, we thought early on, let's block them, but we do a bunch of tourists. We do a bunch of colleges and universities. We do places where you would reasonably expect a foreign card. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Okay, here's a good one. What is Honk doing to secure the QR code when anyone at the printer can reproduce and redirect the QR code? So that's a good one. So we're doing a bunch of things. One, our QR codes are branded. Two, we provide a piece of software to operators so that they can go around and check and make sure that the QR codes are legit. Three, we have done QR behind a bulletproof plexi kind of glass with tamper-proof screws, so it's really, really obvious to someone that if something is overlaid, you can see it. Four, we've done QR codes. They don't have to be, because it's just using your camera. They don't have to be at a height where people get to them easily. The other thing, I would say the last thing we do is we produce unique QR codes. So that's important to know. One of the things that was brought up was QR is less secure than text to pay. Well, I can tell you that earlier today I got a call from a telemarketer that I assure you wasn't calling for the number I saw on my screen was not a home number, right? It was a spoof number, it was a burner number. So no, I don't think that text to pay is any better than QR. I think it's actually the same thing. If someone could make a QR code, someone can certainly come up with a burner number. So yes, so the things that we're doing to secure it, anyone can do it, sure, but this is where the three-party, we're all in this together, comes to play. Because anyone can create a QR code, very, very easy. They won't accept Apple Pay and Google Pay. They won't trigger an app clip. They may or may not be secure from a SSL, TLS kind of perspective. So, there's only so much we can do, because I would ask the same operator a question and say, what are you doing to make sure that there's no skimmers put on your parking meters or pay stations, which has been done. PCI is another thing that gets batted around. And if anyone here has heard of Heartland Payment Systems, or which is now Global Payments, or Global Payments 2, TJ Maxx, Home Depot, these are very, very large retailers and processors, some of the biggest, well-known names in the country. They were all PCI Level 1 compliant at the time that they were victims of the largest security breaches in history. And there was millions of cards. To me, the bigger issue is, what is your payment provider doing with your customer data? Are they storing it? Are they tokenizing it? Are those sort of things? But back to the question that was asked, what are we doing to secure QR? secure QR. We're doing everything that's humanly possible. The question goes down, but we're only one piece of the pyramid. We need work from the other two people. So, you know, the email I showed at the beginning with Netflix, what's Netflix doing to prevent that? Well, certainly they're telling people we don't phish, and they're making people aware. There's bank phishing emails, all that sort of stuff. So we're doing all of those good things, but it also takes a consumer to say, hey, something isn't right here. And it takes, you know, the operator to do their checks and balances, much like, you know, someone sleeping, you know, in the parking garage and all the bad stuff that happens in parking lots, you know, doing those checks to make sure. So it requires, you know, a partnership among three people. Okay, here's an interesting one. What is the this is one about what are some good frauds that I've seen. That's really, I mean, it's really interesting because the fact is that, you know, as I say, the cardholder generally isn't liable here, and so, you know, it's kind of fool me once, shame on me, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So typically, you know, whatever happens with card fraud, it happens once and never again. It really gets insidious more with debit fraud and people emptying up your bank account. But I've seen all sorts of things. And in the world of parking, I've seen everything from students trying to create their own decals. And that's why they chose Honk, why these colleges and universities chose Honk, because the people in the design class are making really good looking decals and they're counterfeit decals. I've seen everything from a student taking a parent's credit card, using that, and then having to deal with the chargeback thereafter. I've seen a whole bunch of frauds. I mean, the fact is that, you know, we follow all the best practices that is possible to follow, but I go back into this, we're all in this together. If we do our part and, you know, no one, you know, the other two pieces of the puzzle don't do their part, then it all falls down. As I said, you know, I gave big names, Home Depot. You know, Home Depot was a victim of credit card security and a credit card breach, and they are, you know, they're still in business today. Okay, I was told I got to look at the, there's a chat here. Answer is, we do real-time payments. Do I see any risks? Here's what I'm trying to get across. There's risks. There's always going to be risks. New technology is meant to decrease risk, but it will never eliminate risk. Just think about the new bills that get issued every few years. That's because, you know, the technology catches up and people counterfeit old bills. So we do real-time payments. We don't do any store and forward. Everything is real-time authorization. We also use best practice security. We CVV, AVS, some of these features so that it would be more difficult and we would disincent people who steal credit cards. We already do Interac on a real-time basis for the Canadian marketplace. So, so do I see risks? We're real-time. I would say run, not walk from someone who isn't delivering real-time payments. There's no reason not to do real-time payments. In fact, I can't think of anyone who's not doing real-time payments any longer. So that's kind of just, you know, the slide that I showed earlier on about, you know, the best practice security. Real-time is in there because if all you're doing is storing the information and forwarding it, well, there's no guarantee that you're ever going to get paid. So real-time 100%. And no, I don't see risks. I see that as the elimination of risk. Next chat. What alternatives are there if someone doesn't have data? And the answer is, there's a business decision to be made here. So there's physical hardware. There's attendance. There's, you know, honor buckets, honor boxes. So there's decisions, there's business decisions to be made. Each one of those decisions come with a revenue, an expense, a risk, and return. So I mentioned I happened to be at a sporting event, and the stadium went from cash accepting to electronic payment only. So how does someone get into that stadium and buy concessions, merchandise, whatever they're selling in that stadium if they don't have a credit card? The answer is they can't. But that business made a decision that their constituents largely, because it's pretty darn expensive to go to a sporting event these days, that they are going to be electronic payment only, and there's a percentage of their constituents that they're not going to be able to address. And they chose not to address them because whether it's the cost, whether it's the risk, whether it's the time, whether it's the effort to address them, far outweighs the revenue that they generate. So if someone doesn't have data on their phone, the question is, how big is that constituent and what do we want to do to address them? And that's not a decision I can make. Obviously, I'm biased. Honk is an electronic payments provider. I've spent my entire career in the electronic payments world. I think cash acceptance is virtually nil and is dropping, and retailers, consumers are demanding touchless forms of payment. The pandemic saw a huge decline in cash usage for like a health and safety reasons. So consumers don't want to interact. They don't want to touch money. But there's a percentage that do. So I'm going to turn that question back at you and say, what are the things, how much do we want to spend? Do we want to be everything to everyone? Then we have to spend, or do we think that enough of our business can be done electronically that for the small percentage of people that don't have data on their phones or don't have debit and credit cards and need to pay cash, or you know, what kind of time and energy do we want to spend on these people? I will tell you this. The pandemic threw gasoline on a fire that was already burning. The world is moving, and I said this earlier, parking is a unattended self-service payment. It has been there. We were the leaders in that for years and years and years. Now big retailers are following. That was the reason I decided, you know, I brought up the Walmart example. The consumer wants it. So I'm going to turn around and ask the question from an ROI perspective, what percentage of people who own automobiles and park automobiles don't have credit cards, don't have phones, or don't have phones with data? I don't know that question, but I'm going to guess that it's a fraction of 1%. But even if I'm wrong, 5%, 10%, I don't think it's numbers that big. But the question is how much time and energy you want to spend. And the second thing I'm going to tell you is we're in a very lucky industry. And when I say lucky, there's not anything of value here that a credit card fraudster wants. So if you steal someone's credit card, people are buying, you know, luxury goods, you know, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, they're buying alcohol, they're buying tobacco, they're buying electronics, they're buying, you know, jewelry. They're buying stuff that has resale value in the secondary market. They're not parking cars, they're not going to McDonald's. So we start from the fact that our industry is pretty low risk. It's high volume, it's small ticket. But that doesn't mean no risk, it's low risk. And from our perspective, you know, the question becomes, you know, we're in a low risk industry. What's riskier? All right, I wanted to keep this to 45 minutes. I don't see any other questions. Hopefully that was useful. You know, I want to really close down on two key points. Absolutely, I am biased. Obviously, Honk is an electronic payments provider. We do a mobile app, we do text to pay, we do QR, we do online payments. Everything we do is electronic payment. So obviously, we're very, very bullish on electronic payment, and that's been my entire career. I do not think electronic payments are unsafe. I think as consumers, we're all using them every single day. But, you know, the last slide that I presented, it takes education on the part of processors like ourselves. It takes knowledge on the part of consumers who are buying, and it takes oversight on behalf of merchants and operators, and we're all in this together. So, on that last question, my vision of the world, and if I look in a crystal ball, I think that cash acceptance is going to continue to decline. I think, all the trends are showing people want contactless, people want self-service, people don't want to deal with people don't want to wait in lines, people, phone adoption is virtually ubiquitous. Yes, there's a percentage of the population that doesn't have phones and doesn't have data, but it's a very small percentage and it's declining. So we're all in this together. And, my vision of the world in the future is touchless, self-serve electronic payment. I think it's cheaper to deliver. It's easier to reconcile. It's not open to theft. It's not open to shrinkage. Yes, it's susceptible to fraud, but only minorly so if you choose the right partners and we're all doing the right things. So if there's no more questions, I thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon. And if you have any questions, we're around to help you and we'd love to address them. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing from everyone.